Rubeus Hagrid. Everyone loves Hagrid. Not everyone knows how brutal his childhood actually was. Hagrid's mother was the giantess Friedwulfa, and giants aren't exactly known for maternal instincts. She walked out when she was barely a toddler, went back to her colony, and never looked back. That left his wizard father a small gentleman raising a half-giant son alone. By all accounts, he adored Hagrid and did the job beautifully. Then he died when Hagrid was around 12, leaving an orphan in a community that viewed giants as monsters. He entered Hogwarts as a regular first-year student at age 11 and was sorted into Gryffindor House. It was supposed to be a fresh start, but it didn't last. In Hagrid's third year, students started getting attacked, and Tom Riddle needed someone to blame for opening the Chamber of Secrets. Hagrid was the easy target, friendless and famously fond of keeping dangerous creatures in his dorm. Riddle pinned it on him, and the staff believed it. At 13, Hagrid was expelled, had his wand snapped in front of him, and was forbidden from practicing magic for the rest of his life. Dumbledore intervened to keep him on as a gamekeeper. So, Hagrid spent his entire adolescence and adult life living in a hut on the grounds of the school that had publicly branded him a murderer, doing manual labor for the institution that expelled him. Fun. Luna Lovegood. Luna Lovegood had one thing going for her: her father Xenophilius. He was eccentric, devoted, and actually present. Everything else was damage. The first hit came at 9. Her mother Pandora was an experimental witch who liked testing her own spells, and one afternoon a spell went wrong in front of Luna. Pandora died in their home, with her daughter watching the whole thing. Hogwarts made it worse. Her Ravenclaw housemates decided Luna was strange and punished her for it for years. They stole her belongings and hid them around the castle as an ongoing joke. Shoes, clothes, school books, anything that mattered to her, vanishing for weeks at a time. She'd spent nights searching the grounds barefoot. Nobody intervened. The nickname Loony Lovegood stuck so completely that it followed her everywhere. Then at 16, the Death Eaters grabbed her off the Hogwarts Express to pressure Xenophilius into silencing the Quibbler. Luna spent months locked in the cellar of Malfoy Manor alongside Ollivander, half-starved listening to Bellatrix torturing other prisoners in the rooms above. By the time Dobby got her out, she'd been a hostage longer than most adults could have survived. Remus Lupin. Remus Lupin was 4 years old when he was bitten by Fenrir Greyback, a werewolf who targeted children on purpose. The attack was targeted revenge. Greyback was punishing Remus's father, Lyall, a ministry worker who had publicly insulted werewolves at a hearing. Lyall came home to find his son wounded and marked with a curse he'd carry for life. The transformations began immediately. Once a month, a small child was locked away alone and turned into something that didn't recognize him. Remus spent his childhood waking up the morning after full moons, covered in claw marks and bite wounds he'd inflicted on himself, scars that never faded. The family's life collapsed around the secret. His parents moved constantly, lived in poverty, and cut off contact with most of their old friends, because a discovered werewolf child meant either execution or a ministry containment cell. Dumbledore offered him Hogwarts anyway, planting the Whomping Willow over a tunnel to the Shrieking Shack where Remus could transform in private once a month. Locals decided the building was haunted from the sounds alone. His friends James, Sirius, and Peter eventually worked out the truth and became animagi just to keep him company during transformations. That's what childhood looked like. Monthly pain, a family on the run, and a kid slowly figuring out that the wizarding world would fear him the moment his secret got out. Dobby. Dobby was born into service at Malfoy Manor, and born into is literal here. When house elf parents serve a family, their children automatically become that family's property. No gap year, no free childhood, which meant his earliest memories were probably of polishing silverware, not playing. His entire childhood was work, and nothing but work. But it was exactly that harsh environment that shaped his one-of-a-kind character. As a house elf, Dobby spent his entire life handling every household task for the Malfoy family. He kept an enormous estate in order, cleaning rooms, cooking meals, serving drinks, and carrying out any command no matter how cruel. His uniform was a filthy old pillowcase, because handing a house elf real clothing would legally set him free, and the Malfoys weren't about to lose free labor. For any misbehavior, Dobby was magically bound to punish himself. He ironed his own hands, slammed his head into furniture, and shut his ears in the oven door. Despite all of this, Dobby somehow came out of Malfoy Manor knowing the difference between right and wrong, something the family he served never figured out. Most house elves considered slavery their life's purpose. Dobby somehow disagreed. Voldemort Voldemort's first fall, the night baby Harry somehow survived the killing curse became Dobby's personal proof that the world could change. So, when he found out Lucius was sneaking Tom Riddle's diary into Hogwarts, he broke the one rule every house elf lives by: loyalty to the master, and warned Harry himself. Later, he stood up to Bellatrix Lestrange to protect his friends, which for a creature in a pillowcase is the magical equivalent of fighting a tank with a tea towel. Classic Dobby. Draco Malfoy. Draco Malfoy had the manner, the money, and a mother who genuinely adored him. That's where the good news ends. Start with his father. Lucius treated parenting like Death Eater recruitment, with love handed out strictly on performance, the right opinions on Muggleborns, the right sneer at the right people. Draco grew up terrified of disappointing him, which is why at Hogwarts he couldn't stop invoking Lucius's name in every argument. Then there's the isolation. Malfoy Manor operated more like a fortress than a house. Draco arrived at Hogwarts having never learned how relationships actually work, and it showed immediately. He tried to buy Harry's friendship and Madame Malkin's with a sneer at Ron, and when that failed, he spent 6 years surrounded by Crabbe and Goyle. The ideology did active damage. Taught from the nursery that house elves were property and Muggleborns were filth, Draco learned to suppress empathy as a survival skill, running the exact program his father installed. The real damage landed at 16. Voldemort moved into Malfoy Manor, and the Dark Lord personally assigned Draco to murder Dumbledore under the threat of family execution. He spent a year watching Bellatrix torture prisoners in his dining room. Then he failed the assignment, the family got pardoned, and the Malfoy name became a national joke. Severus Snape. Severus Snape's childhood started in Spinner's End, a grim industrial corner of a Muggle town. His father, Tobias, was a Muggle, unemployed and violent. His mother, Eileen, was a witch who'd given up on her own magic somewhere along the way. Severus grew up inside their screaming matches. The poverty was constant. At 9 years old, he showed up for his first meeting with Lily Evans, wearing his mother's old blouse and trousers that didn't fit, because there was nothing else to wear. Other kids noticed. Petunia mocked him immediately, and the pattern followed him to Hogwarts. Then came James Potter and Sirius Black. What Severus suffered from them went well past schoolboy teasing. Years of targeted, repeated humiliation, often in front of crowds. The worst of it happened after their OWL exam when James hung him upside down in the courtyard. Severus lashed out the only way he could. Called Lily, the one person who had ever been kind to him, a mudblood in public, and lost her friendship permanently in a single word. By his late teens, Severus had nothing waiting for him at home and nobody left at school. The Death Eaters were the first group that offered him a place, and he took it. Sirius Black. Sirius Black was born into the House of Black, a pureblood family so devoted to blood purity it practically ran like a cult. Sirius rejected all of it, and his own mother, Walburga, hated him for it openly, loudly, and for the rest of her life. Walburga screamed at him constantly, called him a blood traitor to his face, and made the family home a place he actively dreaded. His younger brother, Regulus, played the part she wanted, obedient, proud of the bloodline, and eventually a Death Eater at 16. Sirius was the disappointment, the Gryffindor, the one who came home from Hogwarts with the wrong friends and the wrong opinions. By his teens, he was waging a quiet war inside his own bedroom. He covered the walls with Gryffindor banners and posters of Muggle motorcycles and Muggle girls, then stuck them up with a permanent sticking charm so Walburga could never take them down. Genius. Every time she walked past that room, she was reminded exactly what her son thought of the family values. He ran away at 16 and showed up on the Potter's doorstep, and James's parents took him in without asking questions. Tom Riddle. Tom Riddle entered the world on New Year's Eve in a Muggle orphanage. His mother staggered in, gave birth, named him, and died within the hour. His father, Tom Riddle Sr., a Muggle, had abandoned Merope before the pregnancy even showed. Tom never met a single blood relative. Wool's Orphanage in London took him in. He grew up there through the late 1930s in a city that would soon be at war. Mrs. Cole, the matron, told Dumbledore outright that there was something wrong with Tom. Calm, quiet, and capable of frightening the other kids without ever raising his voice. The magic showed up early and went straight to cruelty. Tom figured out he could hurt others with his mind, make objects move, and terrify other children into obedience, long before anyone told him what he was. He took 2 kids from the orphanage to a seaside cave on a trip and did something to them there that neither would ever talk about again. He was around 10. Nobody ever taught him what love looked like because nobody in his life had any to give him. By the time time Dumbledore showed up with a Hogwarts letter, Tom had already spent a decade learning that power was the only thing that made people treat him well. Neville Longbottom. Neville Longbottom was barely a year old when Bellatrix Lestrange and 3 other Death Eaters broke into his family home and tortured his parents Frank and Alice with the Cruciatus curse until their minds gave out permanently. Frank and Alice survived, but the people they had been were gone. Neville grew up visiting them in the long-term ward at St. Mungo's, where his mother would press empty sweet wrappers into his hand without ever recognizing her own son. His grandmother, Augusta, raised him after that. She loved him in her own way, but her way involved constantly measuring him against his father, a brilliant, brave Auror, and finding him lacking at every turn and letting him know it. Neville internalized it. By the time he got to Hogwarts, he genuinely believed he was a disappointment to the Longbottom name. The family had even doubted his magic. As a small child, Neville showed no signs of being a wizard, and his great-uncle, Algy, decided the solution was to literally drop him out of an upstairs window, hoping fear would force the magic to surface. It worked. Neville bounced down the garden. The adults celebrated. Nobody seemed concerned about what they had just done to a child. At Hogwarts, classmates openly called him nearly a squib. He couldn't remember passwords, melted cauldrons, and jumped at loud noises. Given the childhood, that tracks. Merope Gaunt. If you want to understand Voldemort, start with his mother. Her name was Merope Gaunt, and her childhood was brutal. Her father, Marvolo, was a pureblood fanatic living in a filthy shack in Little Hangleton, obsessed with his Slytherin bloodline and furious that his daughter had turned out plain, quiet, and magically weak. He beat her regularly, at one point strangling her in front of a ministry official who had come to arrest him, and barely pausing for the interruption. Her brother Morphin was worse in his own way. He watched the beatings, laughed through them, mocked Merope for being too afraid of their father to use her own wand, and joined in whenever it suited him. Between the two of them, Merope was the household's cook, cleaner, and punching bag, treated more like a servant than a daughter. All of it broke her. Witches who live in constant terror sometimes lose access to their own power, and Marvolo called her a squib to her face for years. She never went to Hogwarts, had no friends, and never left the property long enough to know another life existed. Ariana Dumbledore. What happened to Ariana Dumbledore is the reason her brother Albus spent the rest of his very long life carrying guilt that never faded, and eventually died for. She was 6 years old when 3 Muggle boys caught her doing magic in the garden and decided to teach her a lesson. They roughed her up badly, and whatever happened in that garden shattered her magic, her mind, and any chance of normal life after that. Her father Percival tracked the boys down and went after them. The ministry sent him to Azkaban for it, where he died without ever seeing his family again. Her mother Kendra moved the family to Godric's Hollow and hid Ariana from the world, because Ariana's magic had become dangerous, unpredictable, explosive, and triggered by fear. A single bad outburst could level a room. One of those outbursts killed Kendra when Ariana was 14. That left her older brothers Albus and Aberforth as her only caretakers. Albus resented the responsibility. He met Gellert Grindelwald that summer, and the two of them began plotting a magical takeover of the Muggle world, while Ariana was left to Aberforth. At 14, she was killed by a stray spell during a duel between Albus, Aberforth, and Grindelwald, and to this day, nobody knows which of the three cast it. Leta Lestrange. And yes, that surname should sound familiar, but Leta came from another branch of the Lestrange name. Long before Bellatrix Black married into the family, you might know her as Newt Scamander's first real friend, the same Newt who wrote the textbook Harry used at Hogwarts. Leta Lestrange's childhood was genuinely terrible, and it started before she was even born. Her father Corvus Lestrange Sr. used the Imperious Curse on a Senegalese witch named Lorena, Leta's mother, to force her into a relationship. Leta was born from that. Her mother died shortly after, and Corvus treated his daughter with about as much warmth as you'd expect from a man who built a family through dark magic. As a small child, Leta was put on a ship to America with her baby half-brother Corvus Jr. He wouldn't stop crying, and Leta, exhausted, alone, still a child herself, swapped him with another baby from a nearby cabin. Then the ship sank. The other family's baby survived, Corvus didn't. Leta spent the rest of her life knowing her brother drowned because of a choice she made before she was old enough to understand what she was doing. She grew up carrying the Lestrange name, which in the wizarding world was already a red flag long before Bellatrix made it famous. Other children avoided her. At Hogwarts, she was the outcast everyone whispered about. Dark family, strange girl, stay away. Newt Scamander was her only real friend, and she lost him too. Leta's experiment with the Jarvey, a magical creature that's basically an aggressive talking ferret, went wrong. Newt took the blame, got expelled, and Leta was left alone again. Harry Potter. Harry Potter was just over a year old the night Voldemort came to Godric's Hollow. You probably know exactly how that night went. What matters for this list is that Harry walked out of it an orphan. Then came the Dursleys. His Aunt Petunia and Uncle Vernon took him in, resenting every second of it, and spent the next 10 years making sure Harry knew exactly how unwelcome he was. They put him in the cupboard under the stairs, a literal storage space between the suitcase, and that was his bedroom until he was 11. His room contained a cot, a spider or two, and the constant sound of Dudley stomping overhead. The treatment matched the accommodations. Harry was locked in the cupboard as punishment for things like Dudley's tantrums, went without meals when Dursleys were angry, and wore Dudley's hand-me-downs that hung off him because he was chronically underfed. His birthdays were ignored. His cousin's gang chased him around the schoolyard as a sport called Harry hunting. He was told his parents died in a car crash. Nobody in the house said their names. Harry spent a decade believing he came from nothing, because the one family he had left was determined to make sure he never found out otherwise. Most of the kids on this list grew up to change the wizarding world anyway. Find out exactly how in all 24 major events you missed after the Deathly Hallows Explained. That's your next lesson here at Stickman Hogwarts. Click now before Voldemort's childhood trauma becomes everyone's problem again.